Hi, I'm Chris Perry, Executive Director of the First 5 Years Fund, and I am so excited to be able to share with you these great early learning poll results from the Grow America Stronger campaign. For those of you who aren't familiar with Grow America Stronger, it represents a broad coalition of national and state advocates who all want to make sure we can capitalize on this truly momentous opportunity. Never before has early learning had such a prominent place on the national stage and on the President's political agenda. Our campaign strategy is driven by a bipartisan team of Jim Messina and Mike Castle and builds on the many successful legislative campaigns they have been a part of. Part of that strategy involves working very hard to create a groundswell of public support for early learning so that target legislators hear a steady drumbeat calling them to take action. As you all know, we're rapidly approaching a critical time as Congress gets ready to pack up and head home for the month. I can't overemphasize how important it is to have you out there vocally supporting early learning and pushing your delegation to vocally support it too. I hope these poll results are a big help to you as you do that outreach. I'm going to turn it over to Lori Waddell from Public Opinion Strategies to tell you more about what they've found and what it means. Lori?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the opportunity to share these very intriguing findings from a recent national survey that my firm, Public Opinion Strategies, which is the largest Republican polling firm in the country, and we worked with Jay Campbell's Hart Research, which is a Democratic polling firm. So this represents the work of a bipartisan research team that co-conducted this survey together. So one of the things that we did, now I can't get it to advance. I'm so sorry. There we go. So one of the things that we did was we talked to a representative sample of registered voters throughout the nation, proportionate by state, and it's demographically representative of the overall electorate. We contacted them on both landlines and cell phones in order to give them an opportunity to participate in either type of venue. And that interviewing was completed July 8th through 11th. The overall margin of error that you're going to see for any one of these numbers is within 3.5%. Obviously, some of the subgroups, it'll be slightly more than that. And again, I mentioned the bipartisan nature of the research team, and we've been sharing these numbers on the Hill to both Republican and Democratic audiences who have been really intrigued with some of the findings that we're going to be sharing today. So first of all, one of the things that we did was we asked respondents to tell us and react to a number of potential goals that people might have for our country right now, and asked them to tell us how personally important each one of those would be. And they rated those on a scale where it was either extremely important, very important, just somewhat important, or not that important to them personally. As you can see from the slide that we're sharing here, slide 3, that increasing jobs and economic growth, not shockingly, was at the top of an importance list. But not far behind that was a direct benefit of investments in early learning, and that is making sure that our children get a strong start in life so they'll perform better in school and succeed in their careers. This is something we've seen in other research that our firms do, both on K through 12 and other early learning work, that people really attach one of the benefits of early learning and investments therein to this idea that kids can get this sort of start in life. Also, when we asked a slightly different question about those opportunities, making sure that working parents can find quality, affordable child care for their young children in the middle of the page there, 7 in 10 told us that that was extremely or very important to them as a goal for our country. It, in fact, exceeded support for improving access to quality health care for low-income families, some of the things we've heard around immigration, or even investments in our national infrastructure, such as in roads and highways. So this is really, these issues are very much in the mix of voters' priorities for the country. Even when we're talking about something that directly affects a fairly small proportion of the electorate, people are attaching direct benefits to our broader society and telling us that that's something important for the country to do. So the other results that we saw really aren't shocking given that overall framework. We saw that voters say broadly that when it comes to ensuring children begin kindergarten with the knowledge and skills they need to do their best in school, that they felt like we ought to be doing more. 7 in 10 said that we ought to be doing more. It was about 1/4 that told us that they thought as a nation we were doing enough. But almost no one told us that we ought to actually be doing less in that area. This is somewhat unique and different. There's plenty of other public policy issues upon which I poll where we don't have that sort of sentiment, and people do sort of attach that as sort of a broad function of government to engage in some of these particular issues. This really extends, the sentiment of doing more extends across partisan lines. While there is some, obviously, relationship to party here, we still have 3 in 5 Republicans saying that we ought to, as a nation, be doing more to ensure that children start kindergarten with the skills and knowledge that they need to succeed. It's over 2/3 of independents who say the same, and nearly 4 in 5 Democrats who echo that sentiment. There's basically not an issue on which I poll that doesn't have this sort of partisan dynamic, but this is fairly muted in terms of some of the other major public policy issues facing the country. It really tells you the broad bipartisan support that action in this particular arena has. That could in part be because many people see a need. They are telling us when we ask what proportion of children did they think begin kindergarten with those knowledge and skills they need to do their best in school. Very few, only 1 in 10, are telling us that nearly all children are in that category. Far more, basically over 2/3, are telling us that about half or fewer of children in this country are starting in that type of advantaged position where they're really ready to go in terms of beginning school. And so that need really influences a lot of their responses in terms of taking action in this arena. So we talked sort of broadly with respondents about what they thought, and then we got a little more specific. And we gave them the explanation of what Congress might be considering in the future, told them broadly, without getting it too far into the weeds, that it was a plan that would help state and local communities provide better early childhood education programs, recognizing that obviously some states have those in place, and specifically focused in on the fact that this was for parents of children from birth to age 5. We also attached a price tag to it, and I think whether it's exactly $10 billion per year, whether some other specific fund, that's less important than the fact that we were talking about a significant investment, $10 billion per year for 10 years in grants to these states in order to engage in providing low and moderate income 4-year-olds with voluntary access to high-quality preschool, making available voluntary programs in high-quality early education and child care for infants and toddlers, as well as those home visit and parent education. Now, notably, we did tell them that the plan would be paid for in some way, using that specific example that had been put out there about a 94-cent per pack increase in the cigarette tax. But really, I think in terms of specifics, the idea, as we're going to see in a second, that it wouldn't add to the federal budget deficit, that there was in some manner, some way to pay for this was probably the more important aspect rather than exactly how it might be paid for. When we asked them to register their thoughts on that particular plan, we had 7 in 10, and you'll note that that was very close to what we saw generically when we asked about doing more, telling us that, yes, they were in support of that proposal. In fact, half said that they strongly supported that this specific proposal, which far exceeds the level of opposition that we registered in the survey. Looking underneath those numbers, those broad overall numbers, again, there is some partisan distinction, but I can tell you it's very few things on which I poll where we attach any sort of funding, much less $10 billion per year for 10 years, and we have 3 in 5 Republicans telling us that they support that. That's sort of a wow moment for a Republican pollster. In fact, we had almost 2/3 of independents indicating support as well, and there was overwhelming support among independents. So even though this was a specific plan that people were asked to think about that contained federal spending it was still deemed to be appropriate by, in fact, supported by people across that partisan spectrum. Now, it's worth noting there is a gender distinction, which is particularly acute among Republican voters. It's very muted among Democrats, only slightly beyond even margin of error among independents, but is far more significant among Republicans. Republican men are essentially divided in their reaction to that specific proposal, but it registers strong support among Republican women, 7 in 10, telling us that they support that, matching the overall national average in terms of support levels that we captured here. And in part, that's because moms were very supportive of the proposal. It's not limited to moms, certainly, but more than 4 in 5 moms are telling, and again, we use that term loosely. This could be women who responded that indeed that they cared for a child in their home under the age of 18. So obviously some of those were using these terms loosely to identify a female caregiver of a child. We also saw that men, irrespective of whether they had a child at home, basically 2/3 of them were telling us that they were in support of this proposal. So there was some gender distinction, again, as we saw more so among Republicans than others. We also wanted to clarify, because certainly that was a somewhat longer explanation of the proposal, and we just wanted to make sure that people were clear and ask them again, would they support or oppose that plan if it were funded in a way that did not add to the deficit and did not increase debt? And in fact, just that little bit of clarification actually increases support. So now we have 77% indicating that they support the proposal, and opposition drops, so it's only 20%. That increase came predominantly among Republican voters, and more specifically, it came among those who identify themselves as a supporter of the Tea Party movement. So as soon as it was clarified for them that this could be potentially a deficit-neutral proposal, their support came up to 64%, and that is really just a significant jump in terms of that overall reaction. It tells you how important it is for that particular audience, that specific aspect of the plan. We did want to get beyond sort of that and look at and sort of parse apart how people reacted to some of these individual elements. Certainly this is something other research has looked at as well, and we asked them just to tell us if they thought each of the following was just very important, somewhat important, not that important, or not important at all in terms of each particular element. And really, the important thing here is that everything is at 3/4 or higher, saying it is at least somewhat important. Although there is about a 20-point distinction in terms of that intensity of that feeling. And so, as not surprisingly, given how people reacted at the beginning of the survey, the idea that making early education and child care more affordable for working families would give children a strong start, that concept is something that we've heard just open-ended conversations with parents and with voters around the country. And the fact that 2/3 tell us that that is very important is truly significant. But every single element of this, the good work that you all do on this issue is certainly something that people deem to be important throughout the country. And it's true, again, across partisan lines. Again and again, we see that there are very few geographic distinctions, that there are even some of those distinctions that we thought might occur there between those who have children at home right now, or even who have children in this particular age group. Those are relatively muted. The party tended to be somewhat more significant, and often is on many public policy issues. But even here, we're registering where basically 2/3 or higher of Republicans, independents, and Democrats are telling us that each of these types of activities and actions and policies that could take place are important for our country. And so given that, it's not shocking that people are saying, hey, this is something that actually deserves some attention. And they would prefer that Congress take action on this proposal now. 63% choose that. Fewer than 1 in 3 tell us that we ought to wait until later to consider this proposal. And so that idea that, perhaps the economy is not quite as strong as it could be, perhaps there's other priorities and other things that they'd prefer Congress to do right now, really voters are just telling us that's simply not the case, and this is something that we could take action on. In fact, when we asked them, attaching it to their member of Congress and saying if their member voted in favor of this particular proposal, would they be more likely to vote for him or her, less likely to vote for them, or would that not make a difference really one way or the other? Now, given the wealth and plethora of other issues, many of which we mentioned to them in the survey, I do think it's significant. We have 2 in 5 telling us that would make them more likely to vote for their member of Congress, given if their support for this issue. But really the important thing is the fact that 82% tell us they would hold them harmless, that this is not an issue that it's spending significant resources of the federal government on. Is something that they are not going to say, oh gosh, that's a negative for me. And that was true even among Tea Party Republicans. Now, to be fair, we wanted to make sure that we simulated some of the dialogue and debate that could take place over this type of an issue in the public domain. And so we gave people 2 different viewpoints. One, that this proposal was a good idea, and again, I don't think it's this proposal specifically so much as this idea of investing broadly in early learning, and told them a number of different reasons why some people have said that this should be a worthy investment, that it will help boost student performance, improve high school graduation rates, ensure students can get the jobs of the 21st century that have those higher earnings. And it's also the type of a plan that would provide states with funding and flexibility to do this on their own. First is the idea that it's really not a good idea, it's a bad idea, and government will be injecting itself into people's private decisions and forcing states to create programs they may not need or want. Really, people are often concerned when we talk about any sort of spending that you're going to create sort of another entitlement program that costs billions, and it may not be something that's really necessary. Even with that simulation of the debate, we still came back to nearly a 2-to-1 margin where voters are telling us no, they believed, and they were more likely to agree with those who said that making these types of investments was a good idea. There are, and again, we're sharing sort of all of the dynamics that we saw here. Again, it's important to note Republican women, independent women, those are really sought-after groups in many political campaigns. They are far more likely to say that this is a good idea rather than a bad idea. Republican men are really the outlier here that are telling us they are more inclined to think of it as a bad idea. And whether it's parents or not, they are more inclined to tell us that they think it's a good idea, and women more so than men. So overall, in this survey, I've quickly covered a lot of numbers, I know, and we'll give you an opportunity to ask some questions or clarify some of these points that I've tried to make, hopefully clearly. But what we saw was that it's really clear that early childhood learning and the benefits it's going to provide are something that's important for voters, that they're placing it in the mix even with the national economy is something that's important. And whether we talk about it just broadly in terms of the idea of doing more versus whether we're doing enough, or whether we get fairly specific with a really specific proposal, they are willing to make significant investments in this area. They do perceive a need, and that's important because public policy solutions need to, and it's amazing how many often are addressing something that people don't really recognize as a need for the nation. And this is not in that category. They very much see this as a need. And they are intensely supportive once they know the plan is going to be deficit neutral. We also, by simulating that give and take, I think have demonstrated that this is the type of proposal that can withstand some criticism. And that while there are obviously a few subgroups that are somewhat more prone to seeing some of the negatives in here, that there is the vast majority of voters are telling us that they think this is a good idea and something that they're willing to support. So I'll turn it back to the moderator who can help us in terms of some of those questions and answers.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that, Lori. We're now going to begin answering some of the questions submitted during today's presentation. And as a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. And I see that a number of you have raised your hands to ask questions audibly as well. So we'll try to get through these as quickly as we can. So Lori, the first question we have is, given the fact that Republican men are in control of the House, and they are the group that polls the lowest on the proposal, will these results influence the House majority?
Wow, that's a good question. So I think that is, that in some ways that is a tactics approach that goes beyond my domain in terms of analyzing the polling data. But I think that, here's what we know. We know that people still have to win campaigns. We are demonstrating that there is clearly some division, obviously more so based on gender, a little bit based on age within even the Republicans, where it is, even those Republican men on the Hill, many of them have spouses who fit into that Republican female category. And so I think it's important that we could demonstrate some of those voices and bring them to the fore, because really they need those Republican women primary voters, those Republican women who show up in upcoming elections to be able to hold their base. And so if this is a way of being able to demonstrate that this is appealing beyond sort of a limited Tea Party group, and being able to extend further, especially when we talk about independents and we talk about moms, who are definitely a group that we look at when it comes to winning elections, that's important. And so even though they fit that profile and their general inclination might be more towards what we're seeing demonstrated in the survey, that there's also people who understand political realities. And I think this is an issue, especially with the benefit of being able to say, there is a specific proposal out there that will not attach some of the downsides that they immediately go to in terms of affecting the deficit. That can be compelling. And so I think it's really up to you all to be able to bring those voices to the fore that can lead them to realizing that there's only a political upside in terms of this particular proposal.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Let's see if we can take an audio question. It looks like Diane has raised her hand. Diane, I'm going to unmute your line, and please ask your question. Go ahead, Diane. Diane, your line's unmuted. Please feel free to ask your question. Okay, it looks like Diane, we'll have to come back to Diane. Let's try someone else here. Looks like Jane has a question. Jane, I'm going to unmute your line. Your line's unmuted. Go ahead, Jane. Jane, your line's unmuted. If you can hear me, please go ahead and ask your question. Okay, Jane, it looks like we don't quite have your audio either. We've got another hand raised here from Sharon. Sharon, I'm going to go ahead and unmute your line. Your line's unmuted. Please go ahead, Sharon. Oh dear, it looks like we're having some issues here with the audio on the attendee side. I'll move on and just kind of switch the focus back to some of the typed questions that have come in. Here's another one, Lori. Can we extrapolate from this poll that early childhood development is ranked as high in Americans' voters' minds, or is it only safe to assume that this data applies strictly to early education?
Can you repeat that?
Sure, sure. Can we extrapolate from this poll that early childhood development is ranked as high in American voters' minds, or is it only safe to assume that this data applies strictly to early education?
Well, I think what we saw, and we tried to be as expansive as possible, and others can chime in on the panel here, but that for example, in some of the and maybe I can go back to it. I'm not sure if I can. Yeah, okay. So when I'll try and bring this back to the screen. At the very beginning of the survey, when we talked to people about potential goals for the country, as I tried to focus in on, we talked about sort of making sure, in broad brush strokes here, making sure our children get a strong start in life, so they perform better in school and succeed in their careers, but also making sure working parents can find quality, affordable child care for their young children. Clearly there is some distinction there that people do draw, and we have, and it brings in lots of other societal factors about how people feel about just broadly changes in family structure and lots of other issues that would obviously have been impossible to cover in a succinct survey like we conducted here, but that people are still telling us in 7 and 10, which is the number that consistently supported the proposal throughout, that even when we got pretty specific, something that affects just a really slim proportion of the electorate, that making sure working parents can find that quality, affordable child care for their young children, that we were still seeing significant proportions telling us that's important. So I do think there's some distinction drawn. That certainly early education does tend to be on safer ground in terms of public perceptions. But there's still a perception that there's a need for quality, affordable child care, and that when we were very, very clear that this was sort of a birth to age 5, and that people were still indicating support for that overall proposal. So some distinctions, but I think there's generally, yes, I think we can say that there is support broadly for that holistic approach for birth to age 5.
All right, thanks for that. We've got another typed question here. Do you have a regional breakdown of the survey results?
Yeah, we do. I mean, and we have it in various formulations, so we can look at sort of a broad, what the census looks at in terms of Northeast, Midwest, South, and West, and then more specific into those 8 census regions. Really, geography is not quite as significant, really, as the relationship to party, but really we move from 68% in the Midwest and South indicating support. I'm talking about this particular proposal that I'm showing on the screen right now, to a high of 74% in the Northeast, and really much of that is just simply related to a little bit to party, but I mean we're not seeing big distinctions. Now, clearly we can't go state by state, and certainly there could be, there could be some distinctions at the state level that are more muted when we're looking at broader regions of the nation. But it's just simply not. It doesn't appear to be being driven by where people are. Rather, it appears to be more. That we do have sort of that broad support across party lines, really, and even across regions of the country.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And just a reminder for you folks, we have plenty of time to take your questions. Pardon me. So please do feel free to type your questions into the questions pane in your control panel while we field the next few. So let's see here. We've got another question for you, Lori. What do you think the top 3 points of the poll were?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaways, and we did try and summarize that at the end, are simply that we are seeing that people recognize the problem, that there's solid support for doing something on that, and then when we get to a fairly specific proposal, especially when we make it very clear that it could be something that's done in a deficit-neutral manner, that there is significant support for that type of a proposal, and that even, okay, well that was 3, but but I guess my 4th would be that even when we sort of tried to slap it upside its head and give a really a strong vocal counter, to something that may sound like a good idea to people initially, but even when we tried to provide a counter view to that there was still significant support.
Okay, great. And we've got a couple of more here. Is it common to have such widespread support for an issue?
Well, I think that, no, I think this is somewhat unique, and I tried to convey that to a few Republican staffers the other day by indicating that there's plenty of things on which I poll that, frankly, we don't have webinars on because people will hear about it and think about it and say, well, I don't know. I'm not sure that's worth like $10 billion a year. Sorry. And so, this is in sort of a unique and different category in terms of public policy proposals. And in part, I think what we're seeing is that people are recognizing there's big changes out there, that the things that that people my age did in preschool and kindergarten aren't going to cut it these days, and that having, if we want to advance as a nation and advance in terms of making sure our kids are getting a good start in life and are able to compete and able to have the jobs of the 21st century, that this is investments that we need to make. And so I think there's just what people are seeing and talking about at dinner and thinking about and, dealing with on a daily basis brings them to that point of view without us having to sort of go in and explain the intricacies of why something is necessary. And so that in and of itself makes this a pretty different issue from lots of things on which I poll.
Okay, great. And we do have another question that's come in here. The question is there a way to give us talking points or infographics that can emphasize how uncommon this support is?
And that might be a question for the team. Well, unfortunately, I guess if lots of my other clients wanted to share their really bad numbers, they're probably not going to do that. So I do think, it's something I tried to convey, and that I think we can provide some context for, and I know Jay has as well. But I'm not sure that we're going to have lots of people stepping up to the plate to share sort of, ways in which this is a little bit different. We tried to provide that in terms of goals for the nation and things that, are receiving lots of discussion in Washington in terms of whether it was transportation infrastructure, whether it was, investments at the border, investments in, obviously Medicaid is a big topic of discussion these days. And that this issues exceed those and are right in the mix of, lots of other major concerns for people. And we try to provide that context, and I do think it, really stands out to folks when something is equaling people's concern about and where they rate jobs in the economy, that this issue is on par with that is, that people on the Hill understand that. And I think people in state legislatures and state capitals understand that as well, that that's not sort of every day that you see something like that.
Okay, great. And we've got a hand raised here. Sarah has raised her hand. Let's give an audio question one more try here. Sarah, your line's unmuted. Go ahead. Sarah, it looks like you've muted yourself. If you could unmute yourself. Okay, looks like we're having an issue with that too. Well, essentially, that wraps up all of the questions that we've had submitted today. And so with that, I think what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Andrew Brenner for a few final remarks. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to join us to run through these poll results. With the Grow America Stronger campaign is really excited about the results that we've seen and the work that's ongoing both at the national and state level. And these poll results present a unique opportunity for national and state groups alike to take these very strong results and show them to unique partners and folks back home as members of Congress head back to their districts in the month of August. We know that the month of August will be a crucial time, and this poll can be a helpful resource as you all plan your activities for the month of August, whether they be events with congressional offices and their staff, whether they be meetings with non-traditional partners, or whether they be communications activities such as op-eds, letters to the editors, and other media articles. At the Grow America Stronger campaign, we've made sure to have a plethora of resources available to you about this poll and others. A number of infographics and sample materials can be found at growamericastronger.org/resources. This is a page set up specially for national and state organizations with sample and template materials that you can use and repurpose however you see fit, including, as I said, specific materials for this poll. We've been excited about the response that we've seen today, and we look forward to all of the work upcoming. We know that this is a unique moment in time, one that may not come around again. The fact that early education has been vaulted onto the national stage the way it has. So thank you all for your time, and we look forward to working with you. If you need to get in touch with anybody at the Grow America Stronger campaign, you can reach me, Andrew Brenner, at andrew.brenner, B-R-E-N-N-E-R, at widmeyer.com, WIDMEYER.com, or my direct line, 202-884-7337. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Andrew, and thank you, Lori, for your presentation, and thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar, Key Findings from the National Survey on Early Learning. If you have any other questions, please contact Lucinda Fickle. Her email address is lfickel, L-F-I-C-K-E-L, at ffyf.org. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation. We would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of